When traveling, whenever I arrive in a new city, a city that I've never visited before, I tend to follow a pretty set routine. I check into my hotel, I put on a pair of comfy walking shoes, I walk out the front door of the hotel and I start to walk. I don't use a guidebook, I don't use a map even, I just start walking. And you get a sense of where the center of the city is, where the interesting things are, simply by the direction of the traffic or the size of the crowds or the signs, that kind of thing. For some reason, my mind is put together that way. When I want to learn something, I have to learn it in my own way, or if I want to learn my way around, I have to do it by trial and error. Anyway, what inevitably ends up happening is around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm pretty exhausted, especially if it's in a tropical country. And generally what I do is, depending on my inclination, I go into either a coffee shop or a bar and order a cup of coffee or a glass of beer. That revives me around that time of the evening. Go home, you have a shower, and then you decide to go out for dinner and whatever nightlife you care, if any, to get in touch with. So I followed this routine in Colombia, in Medellin, Colombia. And around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I stepped into a cantina and I ordered a glass of beer. And then I was about a quarter of the way through when I looked around and I had that proverbial or stereotypical experience. None of these gorgeous young ladies around me were born women. Now that was a bit of an eye-opener, a bit of a surprise. I didn't really think it was a nasty experience or a shock or anything, but it just wasn't. I wasn't in that headspace, and I had to sort of do a double take. Now, this is in the heart of Colombia's masculinity zone. The Texas of Colombia is Medellin. And Colombia is probably the most triumphantly masculine country I've ever been to. In Latin America, women are women and men are men, but even more so in Colombia. And here I am in a tranny bar, and nobody is really trying to hide anything. It's not as if they're worried about being bashed or anything. And after I'd finished my beer, and after a couple of people had struck up conversations with me, it's sort of like, what are you doing here? Aren't you freaked out by us or whatever, or you're a foreigner? They were delightedly surprised that I didn't really make much of a big deal out of it. I walked out and I looked around, and I knew that I was in kind of, not really the red light district, but that kind of a district, the bohemian bar district. And I noticed that a lot of the girls trying to find customers on the street, again, weren't probably born girls. So again, right out in the open. Now, there are other cultures out there, other countries out there that you wouldn't really think are that receptive to the transvestite or transsexual lifestyle, but it would surprise you once you delve into them. For example, South Asia. South Asia is a very sexually conservative part of the world, but India has long had a culture of the chake. I think they're eunuchs, although I think there may be an element of complete genital removal, I'm not sure. And unfortunately, they too are often prostitutes, although sometimes they're sort of wandering Hindu holy women, holy people, and they often are just dancers. They're often hired to dance at weddings and things like this. And this is a deeply conservative society that seems to be okay with this kind of thing. You even see them in Hindi movies, and Hindi movies are always really clean when it comes to matters of sex. In Turkey, a country whose culture of masculinity kind of reminds me a little bit of Latin America's, in which there's a definite defining line between the sexes. Turkish males are expected to be, masculine, not sort of powerfully or aggressively masculine like you see in Latin America, but they're expected to be men. But the host of one of Turkey's, I think it's presently the most popular reality TV shows, is someone by the name of Seyhan Soylu, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but she is a transsexual and really plays up that image. Now again, in the Muslim stereotype, one would think that people would be utterly scandalized by this and have that taken off the air. I'm sure that it's not as cut and dried, and it's probably a lot more controversial in Turkey than would appear from the outside. But the fact is that this is something that's taking place in a culture that you wouldn't really think is receptive to this. And in spite of that vile, pornographic bit of anti-Turkish propaganda that a lot of people have based their opinions on Turkey on, Midnight Express, the average Turk is not a sexually aggressive pedophile. They're actually just quite sexually conservative, again, just like Latin America. I just thought I'd interject that. So I mentioned in the previous video the cultures of Southeast Asia and how they don't really have a culture of aggressive masculinity, but then there are cultures that do have elements of aggressive, or at least aggressive masculinity like you see in Latin America, or at least forceful or overt masculinity like you see in Turkey, or extreme sexual conservatism like you see in India. The Hijra of Pakistan occupy a position that I believe is similar to the Chake in India. I'm not that sure about that. I've never been to Pakistan, so I wouldn't know. And even in Southeast Asia, Southeast Asian men, you find, are not overtly masculine. But one of the interesting things is, all of the cultures of Southeast Asia are warrior cultures. From the Thais to the Burmese to the Cambodians, especially the Cambodians, to the various peoples of Indonesia. We know about the Vietnamese. When they decide to fight a war, they go all out, and they can be an extremely hard nut to crack. When you look at the history of that region, it's hard to reconcile these charming, smiling little people with what you know they're quite capable of if they put their minds to it. Now, the reason I bring all of this in to this discussion of the third sex is that there's nothing threatening to a secure male's masculinity, if you ask me, to this sort of thing. If you're comfortable in your own skin, what difference does it make to you if there's a tranny bar across the street? What difference should it make to you at all? That's somebody else's thing. It's not my thing. That's the way I look at it. And I think that a lot of societies look at it that way, even though they won't come out and say so, or even if you ask a Colombian about that bar up the street, he'll go, oh, yeah, that's full of, maricons or whatever. But he doesn't have the inclination to go over and toss a Molotov cocktail in there. He just doesn't go over there. It's nothing to do with him. That's the same thing that you see in Southeast Asia. I do see, in my own culture, either aggressive or passive-aggressive homophobia, or I don't know what the term is for fear of transgendered people, but I do see that, and I do think that we are far more on edge as Westerners than anybody else is that I've seen in the world. Europeans, I suppose, white people, if you will. Even, again, very manly cultures tend to, at the worst, just be dismissive of it. I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture of these other cultures, and I'm not saying that the lot of a transgendered individual in any of these societies is ideal. What I'm referring to here is heterosexual males' attitude towards transgendered people. Not their lot in life, or even not necessarily the larger society's view of them. But why is it that white society, if I dare use that term, or Western society, i.e. Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, etc., almost unique in the world, finds them, the males of that society, finds that sort of thing a threat and something that they can't sort of just learn to ignore? I wonder about that. I think that we're getting over that stage in our society, but we've got a long way to go. Thank you.